does nose bleeding invalidate one's wudu? Does nose bleeding invalidate one's wudu? And of course, as I endeavor to answer this question, inshallah ta'ala, it is important to note that we are answering the questions during this session according to the Shafi'i school of thought, and the answers may well differ from the other madhahib. And sometimes we would mention the other madhahib because they are perhaps easily mentionable. But for the most part, we would stick to the Shafi'i school of thought for this particular session, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So to answer, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, does nose bleeding invalidate one's wudu? The answer is no, it does not. Nose bleeding does not invalidate one's wudu, nor any other type of bleeding, for in the Shafi'i school of thought, there are only 4 factors that would nullify one's ablution. And what are they? So for our Shafi'i students, if you are officially part of one of the Seekers Guidance Shafi'i courses, then you would know this answer very easily. And for everyone else, there are 4 rules, inshallah ta'ala, if you haven't learned this yet. The one is anything that exits the front or rear private part. Anything that exits the front or rear private part, regardless of what that may be, anything that exits the front or rear private part. There's a technicality in relation to semen, but we won't get into that for now. Let's just make it as general as possible. Anything that exits the front or rear private part, that would break the wudu. So that's factor number 1. Factor number 2 is touching the private parts, front or rear, any of the private parts, with the palms of one's hands, or the part of one's hands that touch when we put our hands together like this, not if it's with the other parts of the hands. And then number 3, it is losing consciousness. So losing consciousness, of course, could mean a variety of things. It could mean being ill and therefore falling unconscious, or being asleep. That is also considered a form of losing, because essentially this is zawalul aql. It is the suspension of one's rational mind at that particular point. There is a caveat here that if one loses consciousness while the buttocks is firmly seated on the ground or on any surface, then this would not nullify the wudu, because essentially the buttocks would be held together by the surface upon which it is resting, and then nothing would basically exit. At least there's a far less chance of something having exited during the loss of one's consciousness. So that brings us up to number 3. And then number 4, it is skin to skin touch between marriageable kin. Skin to skin touch between marriageable kin. So any male who may marry any female, if they touch one another skin to skin, regardless, in the Shafi'i madhab, regardless of whether their touch is by accident or with desire or without desire, or whether it was the front of the hand or the back of the hand or any other part of the body, if it's skin on skin touch, in other words, without a barrier, then in the Shafi'i school that would break one's wudu. So that brings us to number 4. So to revise, anything that exits the front or rear private part, touching the front or rear private part with the inside of one's palms or the parts of the hands that touch when we put our hands together. Number 3, the suspension or loss of one's intellect. And number 4, it is skin on skin touching with marriageable kin. So 2 members of the opposite sex who may marry one another, regardless of whether they are married or not, but if they may marry one another according to sacred law, then that would be considered a reason for breaking the wudu, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So as we can see, with the four instances of wudu breaking, of minor ritual impurity being entered into, according to the Shafi'i school of thought, none of them would comprise nose bleeding. So nose bleeding or bleeding of any other type, as you can see here, of course, bleeding out of the private parts would be something exiting the private parts, right? But bleeding in and of itself, whether it be from the mouth or from the nose or any other part of the body except the 2 private parts, would not constitute breaking the wudu according to the Shafi'i school. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam.
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.